August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, 11:58 on the summer heat hangs over the shattered capital like a suffocating blanket. Glass crunches under the sandals of Private First Class Takashi Morita as he steps through the gutted entrance of the Ministry of War. The building, once the nerve center of an empire, now stands half-burned, its ceilings open to the sky, its corridors emptied of certainty. Air raid sirens are silent for the first time in weeks. Even the cicadas outside seem cautious, as if the entire city is holding its breath. Morita pauses, wiping a line of soot from his neck. He has been running messages all morning, carrying sealed directives between ministries that no longer command anything. Officers whisper. Doors slam. The tension is so thick it feels like electrical current humming through the broken walls. He is 21 years old. He has fought in China, in the Philippines, in Okinawa. But this is the first time he has seen generals afraid that a clerk rushes past him, papers spilling from her arms. Is it true? She asks no one in particular. Is His Majesty really speaking today? No one answers. No one knows. But everyone has heard the rumors. At noon, the emperor will address the nation. It is unthinkable. In the 2,600-year imperial line, no civilian has ever heard the emperor's voice. His words, if spoken at all, are carried only through proclamations and ritual chants. Outside, civilians gather in dusty side streets. Mothers clutching children, elderly men leaning on canes polished by years of labor, students in faded uniforms who no longer have schools to return to. They crowd around neighborhood radio sets, cracked wooden boxes wired to fragile poles, standing like wounded sentinels amid the rubble. A small shop front on Kanda Street. 16-year-old Aiko Sato adjusts the volume dial of her father's radio with trembling fingers. The shop has no roof anymore. Ash crusts the shelves where tea leaves and incense once stood. Her mother kneels beside her, hands pressed tightly together. Aiko has heard whispers all morning. The war is ending. No. The war is changing. No. Japan is preparing for a final decisive battle. No. Tokyo will be annihilated if we do not surrender. Contradictions multiply like smoke trails, but at noon, everyone will hear the truth at the same moment. The truth will have a voice. 2 minutes to go. Across the city, inside the Imperial Palace compound, the atmosphere is entirely different. Guards in crisp, sweat-darkened uniforms stand stationed at every corridor, hands gripping Arisaka rifles. Some look shaken. Others keep glancing toward the inner courts, where Emperor Hirohito has spent the morning in solemn preparation. The recording, made the night before in a small palace chamber, has been hidden, protected from potential coups. Several officers of the War Ministry had attempted to seize it in the early hours, determined to prevent surrender. They believed capitulation was treason. They believed the emperor had been misled. They believed Japan should die fighting. They failed. But the air still feels dangerous, as if a single spark could ignite something irreversible. At 11:59, the broadcast technicians inside NHK lean close to their microphones, palms sweating. They have rehearsed this for hours, checking and rechecking wires, vacuum tubes, and antennas damaged by recent bombings. If anything goes wrong, if the audio falters, if the signal dies, Japan may plunge into chaos. Noon at a soft crackle, at a chime of traditional court music, Kimi Gao, faint and distant, as though drifting from another realm entirely. In Kanda Street. Aiko's breath catches. In the ministry. Morita stops mid-step, turning toward the nearest radio. Across Japan. From Hokkaido's farms to the ruins of Hiroshima, millions fall silent at once. Then a voice, thin and formal, emerges from the static that a voice no ordinary Japanese citizen has ever heard. The emperor, he speaks in slow, archaic court Japanese, words layered with metaphor, phrases weighted with centuries of solemnity. Morita struggles to follow. The language feels ceremonial, almost unreal. The officers around him stand rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The phrasing is delicate, but its meaning lands like a hammer blow. Endure the unendurable. Aiko's mother presses a hand to her mouth. Aiko feels dizzy, as if Tokyo itself is tilted beneath her. Bear the unbearable. On a naval base in Yokosuka, sailors silently bow their heads. In the mountains of Kyushu, families kneel together around a single radio set perched on a sake crate. On the northern coast of Honshu, fishermen stand anchored in the surf, waves breaking around their shins as they listen. We have decided to effect a settlement of the present situation by resorting to an extraordinary measure. A pregnant pause, the kind of pause that divides eras. We have ordered the acceptance of the provisions of the Joint Declaration of the Powers. There it is, not spoken with the word surrender, a word too sharp, too final for imperial lips, but unmistakable. Japan has given in. The war is over. The nation does not erupt in cheers. There is no celebration, only stillness. Aiko clutches the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Morita lowers himself slowly onto a pile of shattered bricks, feeling an ache in his chest that he cannot describe on the palace grounds. A lone gardener drops to his knees, forehead pressed to the gravel. For years, Japan has been fed a single truth, that the emperor is divine, and that defeat is impossible. Now the divine voice has spoken words no one believed possible. The illusion shatters, and in its place, something painful, raw, and entirely human begins to take shape. The broadcast continues, urging the people not to succumb to despair, not to riot, not to abandon hope. Hirohito speaks of rebuilding, of preserving the nation's eternal essence. He speaks of enduring the trials to come with unity. But most listeners hear only the first truth. The war that consumed Asia and the Pacific, the war that emptied families and burned cities to ash, is finished. When the music returns, closing the broadcast, no one moves for several seconds. Aiko is first to react. She collapses against her mother's shoulder, sobbing without sound. Neighbors stare blankly, some weeping openly, others numbed into immobility. In the ministry corridor, Morita watches a senior officer remove his cap with trembling hands. The man has commanded battalions, survived air raids, issued death orders without blinking. Now he is crying. Outside, Tokyo absorbs the news like a wounded animal learning it can finally stop running. The fires that devoured the city for months no longer smoke. The skies, for the first time in years, hold no bombers. Only drifting clouds and the faint scent of rain. The impossible has happened. Japan has surrendered, and millions of civilians, exhausted, starving, uncertain of the future, now face a world they no longer recognize, that a world they must rebuild from ash and memory, that a world reshaped not by generals or ministers, but by the voice of the emperor they heard today for the first time in their lives. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, 12:07 p.m. The emperor's voice fades into static, and for a long time afterward, Japan forgets how to breathe. Private First Class Takashi Morita rises slowly from the rubble pile where he'd been sitting. Around him, the ministry corridor is frozen in a strange tableau. Officers standing rigid as statues, clerks covering their faces with handkerchiefs, a young typist staring at her ink-stained hands as if she no longer recognizes them. Someone whispers, "It's over, truly over," but the words feel fragile, like porcelain ready to break. Morita steps into the courtyard, blinking at the harsh sunlight. A breeze drifts through the shattered pillars, carrying dust and the faint scent of burned paper. He hears the city in a way he hasn't heard it in years. No sirens, no engines, no distant thunder of explosions. Tokyo is silent, that a silence so complete it almost terrifies him. Across the city, in the roofless remains of her family shop, Aiko Sato stands with her mother amid a gathering of neighbors. No one disperses. They stay rooted around the radio, set long after the broadcast ends, waiting for something, another announcement, a sign, anything to confirm the truth. Finally, an old man steps forward. His kimono is patched, his hair white and unbound. His voice wavers. His Majesty has spoken. The war has ended. Aiko expects relief. She expects shouts, or tears, or embraces. But instead, the crowd simply stares at him. For years, the government warned them that surrender would mean national extinction. Propaganda leaflets showed monstrous caricatures of foreign soldiers. Schools taught students to fight with bamboo spears. Mothers were instructed to carry their children into the mountains and resist until death. Now, the emperor, descendant of the sun goddess, the living symbol of Japan, has said the opposite. The emotional whiplash is overwhelming. Aiko feels as if the ground beneath her feet is crumbling. The imperial palace. The inner courtyard shifts from tension to exhaustion. Guards slump against the stone walls, helmets tilted. One sergeant lights a cigarette with shaking hands. Another sinks to his knees, whispering prayers under his breath. Inside a private chamber, the emperor stands before a polished wooden table. His white gloves lie folded neatly beside an empty teacup. He has just changed out of the formal uniform he wore for the recording. A khaki military coat with narrow gold stripes, chosen not for grandeur, but for neutrality. In O1 the room speaks. They bow in silence that Hirohito's face is unreadable, but his eyes are dark with something like grief. For months, he has received reports of devastation. The firebombing of 67 cities, the ruins of Manila, the starvation in Okinawa, the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Each report weighed heavier than the last. This morning, before the broadcast, he told his advisors, "If we continue fighting, the Japanese people will be destroyed." Now, the weight of that choice presses invisibly across the entire nation. Outside the palace walls, civilians gather along the moat. Some kneel, others lay flowers, even though most petals are wilted or torn from the heat. A group of teenagers stand at attention and bow deeply toward the palace, tears streaking down their faces. For them, the emperor's word is absolute. If he says the war is over, then everything they believed about honor, sacrifice, and destiny must shift at once. But not everyone reacts with quiet acceptance. In a small apartment near Ueno Station, Corporal Daichi Nakayama, recently returned from Manchuria, slams his fist into the wall. His bandaged arm trembles with fury. "So we fought for nothing?" he growls. His wife recoils slightly, unsure how to comfort him. "My friends died for what?" "For surrender." He staggers to the low table where his service rifle rests. His wife grabs his wrist. "Daichi," she whispers urgently. "The emperor has spoken." Her voice cracks on the last word. The rifle stays on the table, but the rage does not. All across Japan, soldiers who had prepared themselves for a final homeland battle feel something between betrayal and hollow relief. Some punch walls, some scream, some collapse into sobs that shake their bodies like earthquakes. Others simply stare at their hands, wondering what it means to survive a war they were told would never end. At Yokohama Port, a group of dockworkers stand beside rusting cranes, listening to the echo of the emperor's words replayed on a portable speaker. Ships lie broken in the harbor, masts jutting out like snapped bones. A few workers remove their headbands marked with rising sun symbols and fold them away like relics of another lifetime. "Does this mean the Americans will land soon?" one man asks. Another replies, "They will come as occupiers, but not as conquerors." That is what His Majesty said. But the word occupiers hangs heavily in the air. For decades, Japan saw itself as destined to rule an empire. Now it faces the prospect of foreign boots on sacred soil, a possibility that once seemed inconceivable, even shameful. Yet even fear cannot fully mask the faint, fragile sense of something else. Relief that a woman clutching a baby exhales for the first time in days. A group of children chase each other among the cargo crates, unaware of the magnitude of the moment. A fisherman kneels beside the water, letting the waves wash over his hands, whispering thanks to whatever gods are still listening. In the ministry courtyard, Morito walks toward the main gate. The sun is high, reflecting off shards of broken glass like scattered stars. He passes two officers arguing in low, bitter tones. "We should have fought to the last man and doomed the nation. Better death than disgrace. His Majesty chose life." The first officer falls silent, not convinced but defeated. Morita keeps walking. His boots crunch softly on the gravel. With every step, he feels the war peeling away like old skin. Not gone, never gone, but loosening, uncoiling, losing its grip on him. That he thinks of his parents in Yokohama, that he thinks of the friends he lost in the Philippines, that he thinks of the younger soldiers who looked up to him, now scattered like ashes on foreign beaches. And he wonders, what happens to a soldier when the war ends? But his memories do not. In Candace Street, Aiko and her mother return inside the ruined shop. The walls are cracked, the air heavy with dust, but the radio still hums softly on the counter. Her mother kneels and begins clearing debris with slow, deliberate movements. Aiko doesn't ask why. She knows. The war is over. Life must begin again. Even if no one knows how, outside, Tokyo finally exhales that a long, tremulous breath that carries sorrow, confusion, and a faint spark of hope. Japan has stepped out of the fire, and now it must walk through the smoke. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, 12:41 p.m. A warm gust rolls across the city as if the wind itself is exhaling with the people. But beneath that breeze lies something heavier, an emotion too complex to name. Not merely sorrow, not simply relief. Something deeper, older, a feeling that sits at the core of the Japanese spirit, the weight of defeat. Private First Class Takashi Morita walks through the streets surrounding the Ministry of War, noticing details he has never allowed himself to see. A tailor shop reduced to charred beams. A tram line twisted like a broken spine. A child's tin toy half melted into asphalt. He had always walked past these ruins with purpose, with orders, with urgency. Today, there is none of that. Today, he is simply a young man lost in a city learning how to die and live at the same time. An elderly woman wearing a threadbare kimono approaches him timidly. She bows. "Soldier, is the announcement true?" Morita swallows. He knows the correct protocol would be to direct her to an official source. He knows the military manuals. He knows the training, but something inside him softens. "Yes," he says quietly. His Majesty has ended the war. The woman closes her eyes, her shoulders trembling. She bows again, deeper this time. "Thank you," she whispers. "For what?" Morita wonders. For surviving? For losing? For being here to speak the words aloud? He doesn't know. He only knows that as she walks away, he feels smaller and larger at the same time. In the shattered remains of the Sato family shop, Aiko stands barefoot on the tatama mats that survived the firebombing by sheer luck. Sunbeams filter through the missing roof, illuminating drifted ash like falling snow. Her mother removes the fabric sign from the front stoop, a faded curtain that once read Sato Trading Company. The ends are burned, the stitching undone. She folds it slowly. Aiko asks, "Mother, what happens now?" Her mother looks up, eyes glossy. "Now," she says, "we endure, and we rebuild. But the Americans, we will face them as human beings, not as enemies." Aiko isn't sure what that means. She grew up hearing nothing except warnings about the invaders. Now her mother speaks, as if those same enemies are simply people. She looks outside. Neighbors gather in small clusters. Some kneel to pray. Others stare at the sky, as though expecting aircraft to materialize at any moment. A few hold newspapers printed only hours earlier, pages filled with propaganda that is already obsolete. Aiko feels something twisting inside her. The world changed today, and no one is ready out on the outskirts of Tokyo, at Yoyogi Parade Ground. Thousands of soldiers stand in silent formation, not because they were ordered to, but because they have nowhere else to go. Many cling to their weapons out of habit. Others hold nothing but personal belongings, a family photo, a canteen, a letter from home. Lieutenant Shiro Tanabe, a veteran of the Burma campaign, steps onto a small wooden crate. His uniform is stained with mud from a dozen jungles, his eyes sunken from malaria and exhaustion. When he speaks, his voice is hoarse. "Men, the war has ended." A murmur passes through the ranks. Not outrage, not disbelief, just a long, hollow sigh. Tanabe raises a hand. I know what you were thinking. I know what we were taught. That surrender was worse than death. That we must fight until our last breath. He pauses, guilt tightening his jaw. But His Majesty has spoken, and so we follow. A young corporal asks, Sir, what do we do with our rifles? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a burning temple. Tanabe closes his eyes. For now, he says softly, hold on to them. But do not use them. Around him, thousands of soldiers nod, obedient, uncertain, and profoundly lost at T. Ueno Station. The loudspeakers crackle to life. A trembling announcement begins. All citizens are to remain calm. Await further instructions from the government. The military police will maintain order. Looting or violence will not be tolerated. People gather near the tracks. Families who fled fire bombings. Refugees from destroyed towns. Wounded men waiting for trains that no longer are UN. An exhausted mother slumps on a bench, her infant wrapped tightly against her chest. A station guard hands her a ladle of water from a communal bucket. She murmurs, Is the Emperor safe? The guard nods. Yes. Her relief is so pure it nearly breaks him. Behind them, a group of young boys wearing school uniforms crumble into tears. One whispers to another, My brother died on Saipan. He thought he was dying for the Emperor. What does it mean now? The other boy cannot answer. They sit together on the floor, leaning against each other like two saplings bending in the wind. WWII early afternoon. News spreads to the countryside, where word travels more slowly but cuts just as deeply. In a small farming village in Nagano Prefecture. Old Mr. Hayashi stands in the rice fields as the village elder repeats the Emperor's message. The stalks sway gently in the breeze, green and golden and painfully alive. Hayashi sinks to his knees in the mud. He has lost 2 sons. The war took them without ceremony, without graves, without bodies. Now it is gone too. His daughter-in-law runs to him, falling beside him. She holds his lined, calloused hands as he breaks down in the fields he has tended for 40 years. The crops sway on, indifferent. Back in Tokyo, Morita finds himself outside a small shrine that somehow escaped the bombing. Its torii gate is scorched, but still standing. A group of young mothers kneel before it, praying for sons who will never return. But he steps inside and bows before the altar, not to ask for forgiveness, not to seek guidance, just to stand in the quiet with people who understand. Tokyo feels different now, as if the entire city is grieving together. A nation weeping not only for the dead, but for the person each man, woman, and child once believed they had to be. That Aiko's mother was right. Japan will rebuild. But first, they must survive the moment when hope and heartbreak coexist in the same breath. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, 1:22 p.m. The heat of the day settles over the city like a thick blanket. Dust motes drift lazily through beams of sunlight falling across ruins. In the distance, a temple bell rings, slow, resonant, almost mournful. The sound ripples across neighborhoods still paralyzed by the Emperor's voice. Private First Class Takashi Morita leaves the shrine and begins walking toward the military barracks near Kadanshida. His steps slow when he reaches a long avenue lined with ginkgo trees, many of them burned down to blackened stumps. The air smells of sun-baked earth and char ahead of him. A group of soldiers emerge from the barracks gate. Some carry duffel bags. Others have makeshift bundles tied with rope. A few still wear bandages from recent battles or from the devastating air raids that ravaged Tokyo. Morita recognizes one of them, Sergeant Yoshio Watanabe, a man he fought alongside in Leyte and barely recognized upon returning to the homeland. The sergeant sees him and raises a hesitant hand. Morita, he says quietly. You heard it too? Morita nods. Watanabe shifts his pack and looks away. I'm going home, he mutters. Haven't seen my family in 3 years. He tries to smile, but it dissolves into something like guilt. Feels strange, he adds. Walking back alive, when the others, his voice trails off. Morita rests a hand on the sergeant's shoulder. Go, be with them. Watanabe nods and steps past him heading toward the station with hundreds of other soldiers pouring out of the city's military centers. Some walk with purpose, eager to return home. Others drag their feet, worried about how they'll be received. A few wander aimlessly, overwhelmed by the sudden absence of command. The war had given them structure, identity, certainty. Now they must rebuild themselves from scrap. Meanwhile, in the Sato family shop, Aiko watches as the first wave of returning soldiers passes down Kanda Street. They appear like ghosts from another world, thin, hollow-eyed, uniforms stiff with sweat and travel dust. Some lean on walking sticks. Others support wounded comrades. Aiko's mother steps outside and bows deeply to them. Aiko follows. Mimicking the gesture point, one young soldier stops. He returns the bow with visible hesitation. His face is sunburned and bruised, his hair matted, his gait uneven. He carries no pack, only a torn photograph tucked into his waistband. He studies the ruined shop behind them. This was a tea seller's shop, wasn't it? Aiko nods. It was. He closes his eyes for a moment. My mother used to buy rice crackers here when I was small. Aiko's mother smiles softly. Come back when we reopen. We will remember her. The soldier swallows hard. His lips tremble, not with exhaustion, but with gratitude. Then he bows again and continues down the street, disappearing into a line of men who look just like him. Aiko realizes something then. The soldiers returning are not heroes in triumph, nor criminals in disgrace. They're broken boys, coming home to a country more shattered than they are. Across the city, trains groan into motion at Tokyo Station. The glass dome is gone, the roof partially collapsed, but the tracks still function. Crowds gather on the platforms as the first trains carrying repatriated troops roll in from the outskirts. When the doors slide open, the platform erupts. Not with cheers, but with choked sobs. Wives clutch husbands who can barely stand. Children cling to fathers they no longer remember. Parents embrace sons believed to have died months ago. That a father collapses to his knees when he sees his daughter wearing a borrowed kimono, her own burned in the firebombings. He drops his cane and crawls toward her, arms shaking. Nearby, a soldier disembarks and scans the crowd. No one steps forward. The platform empties, leaving him alone beside the train. He sits on a bench and stares at his hands. His family is gone, killed in the March raid. Yet he has returned. It feels wrong. It feels merciful. It feels unbearable. Not all reunions are joyful. In a narrow alley by Hongo Ward, Corporal Daichi Nakayama returns to his apartment. His wife kneels inside, folding laundry. She turns when she hears the door. For a moment, they simply stare at each other. Two strangers shaped by war. Nakayama drops to the floor and bows so deeply his forehead touches the tatami. His breath shudders. I failed, he whispers. I survived when I was supposed to fight until the end. His wife kneels beside him, tears pooling in her eyes. You survived, she says. That is enough. But the words don't reach him. Not yet. He presses a hand to his bandaged ribs, trying to hold himself together. In rural villages, homecomings feel different. Soldiers walk dusty roads toward wooden houses framed by rice fields. Mothers cry into aprons. Younger siblings hide behind doorways, fearful of men who resemble warriors, not brothers. That on a farm in Aomori Prefecture, a soldier named Ryoji Kimura finds his parents tending the fields. His father looks up, squints, then drops his hoe in shock. His mother runs to him with arms outstretched. For a moment, the three collapse into a single embrace. Mud, sweat, and tears mixing silently. Behind them, the fields sway in gentle waves. The war has ended. But life continues. As the sun dips lower over Tokyo, soldiers continue streaming through the city, heading toward stations, trams, and roads leading home. Morita stops on a bridge overlooking the Sumida River. He watches the soldiers moving beneath him. Thousands of them, each carrying a story carved into flesh and memory. Aiko, standing not far from her family's ruined shop, watches them too. The street fills with men returning from islands she has never heard of. They will rebuild Japan. They will reshape its future. But first, they must learn how to feel again. For now, there's only exhaustion and a fragile hope that maybe, somehow, life can begin again after fire. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, 3:04 p.m. Late afternoon light turns the ruins of the capital into long strokes of gold and shadow. Heat radiates off collapsed brick walls. Smoke from distant cooking fires rises gently into the air, thin, wavering strands that seem to signal a strange new era. Not peace, not yet, but an absence of war. Private First Class Takashi Morita stands at the edge of the Imperial Palace, moat among a growing crowd. Civilians kneel, soldiers stand stiffly, and elderly men bow so deeply their hands touch the pavement. Everyone waits for any sign, any movement from beyond the palace walls. Rumors ripple through the crowd like low tremors. American ships are already on their way. They will land at Yokosuka. I heard the government is preparing documents. Surrender papers. MacArthur will come himself. Morita listens without reacting. He's too drained to care about speculation. But when an elderly man beside him mutters, "This is the death of the empire," Morita feels something tighten in his chest. Death of the empire. Birth of what? No one knows that in the Sato family shop ruins. Aiko carefully sweeps the floor. The dust rises in pale clouds each time her broom glides over the cracked tatami. She doesn't mind the grit in her throat or the gritty welts on her palms. Sweeping gives her something to do, something that feels like control. Her mother sits nearby, mending a torn cloth bag. Her expression is peaceful in a way Aiko hasn't seen in years. "Mama," Aiko says quietly, "are you afraid?" Her mother looks up, smiles faintly. Of what comes next? Yes, but also, she places a hand over her chest. There is relief here, relief that we may live, relief that you will not have to grow up in a nation at war. Aiko glances at the doorway. The street is almost calm now. A few soldiers pass by from time to time, followed by bicycles, handcarts, and silent neighbors moving like shadows. She asks, "Do you think the Americans will be cruel?" Her mother pauses. "Some may be kind, some may not, but they are human, and so are we." Aiko isn't sure. Ever since she was little, the Empire had told her otherwise. Her textbooks describe Americans as beasts or demons. Her teachers warned that the enemy would destroy everything: temples, shrines, families, honor. Yet her mother speaks as if none of that was ever real. The shift feels like stepping onto new earth. The Ministry of War. Officers gather around a dimly lit table. Maps of the Pacific, once covered in flags marking Japanese positions, are nearly bare. Pens scratch across documents. A single electric lamp flickers over them. Major General Masaru Kawabe removes his glasses and rubs the bridge of his nose. "The Americans demand unconditional surrender," he says. Another officer replies, "His Majesty has already chosen this path. We must prepare to receive the Allied delegation." Kawabe looks at the scattered papers, directives, communications, translations. Every document represents collapse. Every signature represents an empire's final breath. That he whispers, "How did it come to this?" A captain, barely 22, answers without looking up. "Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and everything before." Silence blankets the room. They work on. Men trying to perform duties they had prayed never to face. At home in Shizuoka, a fisherman named Saburo Yamane returns to his wooden cottage after hearing the emperor's broadcast from a neighbor's radio. His wife sits on the veranda, repairing fishing nets. She looks up when he approaches. "So it is true," she murmurs. Saburo sits beside her. The smell of the sea clings to him. Salt, kelp, drifting wood. "For 20 years, he says, they told us we were destined to rule Asia. Now," his wife ties a knot in the netting, her fingers steady. "Now we survive." Saburo picks up a length of net, staring at the fibers. "The Americans might take our boats, our catch, our ports. Maybe," she replies softly. "But they cannot take the tides." He looks at her, surprised. She smiles faintly. "The sea has no emperor." Saburo laughs, a short crack sound. Then he keeps mending the nets, working alongside his wife, as if rebuilding the world is no harder than tying knots in thread. By early evening, The sun lowers in a hazy orange clouds over Tokyo Bay. The water shimmers. Fishing boats drift quietly. And on the horizon, tiny specks appear. Merchant ships, possibly allied reconnaissance, or maybe just illusions born from heat and fear that a group of children playing near the shoreline stop and stare. One boy tugs his sister's sleeve. Are those the enemy? She squints. What does the enemy even look like? The boy hesitates before answering. Like us. The question hangs between them, uncomfortable and new. Behind them, their mother calls them home to the barracks. Morita returns to his quarters to pack his few belongings. Most soldiers have already left. The building is strangely quiet. Wooden floorboards creak as he walks down the corridor, but he finds his bunk, neatly arranged, untouched since morning. On the floor lies a small paper envelope. He picks it up. Inside is a letter. The handwriting is familiar. Tight, clean. Disciplined.it is from Corporal Hinata Suura, his closest friend in the Philippines. But Hinata died 2 years ago in Ormoc Bay. Morita unfolds the paper. Takashi, if you return home before I do, tell my sister I fought well. Tell her I didn't suffer. And tell her I kept my promise. I did not fear the enemy. Only the thought of leaving her behind. Morita sinks slowly onto the bunk, the paper trembling in his hands. The war is over. But Hinata will never know. He wipes his eyes with the back of his sleeve and folds the letter carefully, placing it into his breast pocket. A burden, yes, but also a duty. A final order he intends to honor. This night deepens over Tokyo. Lanterns begin flickering in windows. People gather in small groups, some for prayer, some for comfort, some simply because silence feels unbearable when shared. Aiko stands outside the shop, watching fireflies drift above the rubble. Her mother calls to her, but she doesn't answer. Across the street, Morita approaches, moving slowly, as if each step requires conscious effort. Their eyes meet briefly. Strangers, citizens of a defeated nation, bound by a moment larger than either can fathom. Morita bows slightly. Aiko returns the WWII is small, polite, almost insignificant. But in a city learning how to breathe again, it feels like the first quiet step towards something resembling a future. Japan has not yet surrendered on paper. The formal documents await signatures, negotiations, and arrangements. But the truth is already settled in the hearts of its people. The war is over. And tomorrow, whatever shape it takes, must be faced with empty hands and open eyes. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo.at precisely 11:58 a.m. The cicadas outside the battered wooden homes screeched into the late summer heat. Inside those dim rooms, in factories, in schoolhouses, in train stations halted mid-operation. Millions of Japanese citizens stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on tabletop radios, breath held as the hands of clocks inched toward noon. 2 minutes to go. For weeks, the country had teetered on the edge of something unimaginable. The atomic ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki hung over the national consciousness like a shroud, but still surrender? It was a word no one dared speak aloud. Sakurai Hirohito, a machinist in his late 30s with grease still on his hand from the collapsed factory he'd walked away from, stood beside his wife and 2 children in their cramped living room. The radio in front of them, a square cloth-fronted wooden set with a faint electrical hum, had never once carried the emperor's voice. No one had heard it in the entirety of his reign. Even now, Hirohito wasn't sure he would understand it if it came. The emperor's speech, people whispered, would be delivered in ancient court Japanese, distant from common speech. But they waited. Because everyone waited that on the other side of the city, in a half-burned school building where the windows had long since melted and run down like candle wax, a crowd of students and the elderly gathered around another radio, propped on a crate. A teacher, Miss Ishikawa, stood by the frame of a blasted-out doorway, hands clasped in front of her. She had once lectured her students about the glory of the Pacific Advance, the divine bravery of the Imperial Navy, the unbreakable will of the Japanese spirit. Now she just prayed the broadcast would begin in the Imperial Palace itself, the recording, captured the night before under the protection of loyal guards who had fought off a coup, sat ready on a turntable. The phonograph needle hovered inches above the lacquered disc that held the emperor's words. Those who knew what was on it had been sworn to secrecy, but whispers had already spread through the capital. This was not an address of victory. At exactly 12 p.m., the needle dropped at a crackle, at a hiss, and then, to our good and loyal subjects across Japan, millions went silent. Children stopped fidgeting. Mothers lowered their eyes. Soldiers standing guard at checkpoints stiffened, unsure if they were even permitted to listen. The emperor's voice, higher, softer, more fragile than any had imagined, struggled through the static of the overburdened broadcast system. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Hirohito felt his chest tighten. Miss Ishikawa pressed a hand to her mouth. In a fishing village in Kyushu, an old man who had lost 3 sons at Saipan, Leyte, and Okinawa dropped to his knees in the sand. The emperor continued, his words layered in archaic phrasing that the average citizen strained to comprehend. "We have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all generations to come." And then the sentence that ripped through the soul of the nation. "We have ordered the acceptance of the provisions of the Joint Declaration of the Powers." Acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, that of Allied terms. Akati took a moment, a long, heavy moment, for the meaning to land. Japan had surrendered. Miss Ishikawa closed her eyes. Hirohito's wife let out a sound that was somewhere between relief and heartbreak. A young soldier standing in a train station stared at the floor tiles, jaw trembling as he tried to reconcile what he'd been taught with what he was hearing. The emperor's voice, still soft, still struggling past the static, delivered the words that shattered every illusion of invincibility. "Endure the unendurable, and suffer what is insufferable." A mother in Osaka began to cry silently. She remembered the day her eldest son marched off for Manchuria in a crisp imperial uniform, believing he was fulfilling a sacred duty. He never returned. In a barracks near Yokohama, conscripts looked at each other with blank, hollow faces. Some whispered prayers. One young recruit clenched his rifle, then slowly, deliberately, set it down on the floorboards by the time the broadcast ended. The nation remained frozen, and oh cheers, and oh gasps. Just an immense, collective stillness, as if Japan had momentarily forgotten how to breathe. And in that stillness, realization settled like falling ash. The war, after 15 years of conflict across Asia and the Pacific, was finally, irrevocably over, and returned to the empire they had known, and triumphant charged, and glorious last stand. Only surrender. And now, the civilian heart of Japan had heard the truth directly from the emperor's own lips, that a truth that would reshape everything that came after. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo. The broadcast ended with a long, low crackle, nothing more than the hiss of empty air. But no one moved. No one dared speak first. It was as if the emperor's final syllable had frozen the entire nation in place. For several heartbeats, Japan existed in absolute silence. Sakurai Hirohito stared at the radio, unable to blink. His children looked up at him, their faces tight with confusion. "Oh, Tosin, what did he say?" his daughter whispered. Hirohito opened his mouth, but no words came out. How did a father explain to a child that the empire she'd been told was eternal had fallen in a single, trembling broadcast? How did anyone explain that the war, which had devoured everything, cities, families, hope, had ended not with the roar of guns, but with the soft, strained voice of a man no civilian had ever heard until now? In a shattered schoolroom across the city, Miss Ishikawa leaned against the charred wall, her breath shaking. The children around her, some barefoot, some still in patched uniforms, stared at the radio as if expecting the emperor to speak again. One boy, Hiro, broke the silence. "Sensei, does this mean we lost?" Miss Ishikawa swallowed hard. The word lost had never been spoken in her classroom. Not once. She knelt beside him, steadying her voice. "It means the fighting is over." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of what she could not bring herself to say. Yes, we lost. Outside, The cicadas droned on as if nothing had changed. But everything had to, in distant northern prefectures. Farmers stopped mid-harvest, hands dangling at their sides as the meaning of the emperor's words crept in. They had lived through rationing, through the slow disappearance of rice and salt and fish. They had seen sons conscripted and daughters evacuated. Now they stood in open fields under a blazing sun with only one thought. What happens to us now? In Kyoto, a group of elderly men sitting outside a temple stared into the courtyard pond. One of them, a retired sergeant from the First Sino-Japanese War, let out a long exhale. "So, it has come to this," he murmured. Another man tightened his grip on his walking stick. At least the dying stops." But even that was uncertain. Reports from the provinces had already hinted at soldiers refusing the news, officers denying the possibility of surrender, and die-hard factions preparing for acts of defiance. For years, the nation had been told that death was preferable to defeat. Now, everyone lived in that tension, between relief and dread, between the end of destruction and the beginning of the unknown. In a crumbling barracks near Yokohama, Private Nakano stared at the rifle resting across his knees. The emperor's words echoed in his skull. Endure the unendurable. He felt something inside him uncoil, tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since his first day of training. Slowly, he lifted the rifle and looked at it not as a weapon of duty, but as a symbol of a world that had just been pulled out from under him. That a senior sergeant walked the length of the barracks, eyes flicking from soldier to soldier. "Well," Nakano whispered. The sergeant took a long breath. "If His Majesty commands it, then the war is over." He paused, voice lower. "And if the war is over, then we live." Some soldiers cried quietly. Others stared forward with blank expressions, struggling to process a reality that contradicted everything they had been raised to believe. In the capital, the shock began to loosen its grip that a woman in a kimono stepped outside her home, placing both hands against her chest as if steadying herself. She looked up at the sky, a sky she had watched for months for the black silhouettes of B-29 bombers. Now empty, peaceful, painfully blue. Her neighbor approached cautiously. "Did you hear it?" "Yes." Her voice cracked. "We surrendered." The neighbor wiped her eyes. "It feels like a dream. A nightmare finally ending," the woman whispered. For some, it was relief. For others, humiliation. For most, something too complicated to name. But slowly, sound began returning to the streets. Doors opening, sandals scraping pavement, distant murmurs as people stepped outside and looked around, as if expecting the world to appear different now that the emperor had spoken. And in a way, it did. The illusion of invincibility was gone. The fear of the next air raid evaporated. The future, once imagined in the language of conquest, was suddenly blank. The war, the one that had defined their entire existence, was over. But the peace that followed would be longer, harder, and stranger than any of them could yet imagine. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo. Only minutes had passed since the broadcast ended, yet the city felt transformed, as though some invisible pressure that had been crushing it for years suddenly lifted, leaving behind a confused, trembling lightness. At first, people stepped outside cautiously, blinking in the summer glare, as if unsure whether they were allowed to share the same air after hearing such earth-shaking words. In Hirohito's neighborhood, doors slid open one by one. Mothers carried infants. Elderly men leaned on canes. Children hovered behind parents' legs. For the first time in months, no one scanned the sky for bombers. No one covered their ears, expecting sirens. That a middle-aged man stepped into the street, holding a radio, still buzzing with static. "It's true," he said, voice hoarse. "His Majesty said it himself." The words rippled through the crowd like a physical force. Some gasped, some cried. Some simply lowered their heads in stunned disbelief. Hirohito looked around, watching neighbors he'd known for decades. People who had endured firestorms, starvation, and impossible hope, as they struggled to understand the weight of this new reality. His wife took his hand. "What does this mean for us?" she whispered. Hirohito shook his head. "I don't know. Across the city, the first open displays of emotion erupted on a street in Shitamachi. An old woman fell to her knees beside a bus stop and began sobbing, not out of grief, but relief so immense it overwhelmed her. She had lost 2 sons in the Pacific, and for months she expected to lose her last one fighting the Americans in the home islands. A passerby knelt beside her. "Oh, Basin, are you hurt?" She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, they'll stop sending boys to die. They'll finally stop." In Winnow, a group of university students gathered beneath a half-collapsed shop awning, many of them holding notebooks with lessons that would never again be taught the same way. Their professor arrived minutes later, adjusting cracked spectacles. "So," he said quietly, "the war ends not with fireworks, but with a voice." One student punched the wooden pillar beside him. "All those years, all those lies, all that blood." Another student snapped back. "It wasn't lies, it was loyalty. How dare you?" The professor stepped between them. "Enough. Today is not for anger. Today is history breaking open." The young men fell silent, breathing hard in the still summer heat. Near the Sumida River, a crowd formed along the embankment. People stared at the water, its surface reflecting a sky far too calm for the turmoil in their hearts. A fisherman in a faded navy jacket spoke into the quiet. "So this is what peace sounds like." A woman beside him shook her head slowly. "No, this is what loss sounds like." But even she seemed uncertain. Peace, loss, shame, relief. The emotions mixed until no one could separate them. Meanwhile, some resisted the truth. In a narrow side street, a former naval officer in a tattered uniform shouted at anyone who would listen. "No, this cannot be real. The Emperor would never command surrender. It is a fabrication, American trickery." His face was red with fury, hands shaking as he clutched the hilt of a ceremonial sword. A pair of young men tried to calm him. "Sir, we heard it too." "You fools," he roared. "You think the Empire can fall because of a single broadcast." But then he stopped, the fight draining from his body all at once. He dropped to his knees, the sword clattering to the stones. His voice cracked. "Then everything we fought for was for nothing." No one answered him. Back in the heart of the capital, crowds gathered around loudspeakers mounted on utility poles. Some had missed the broadcast entirely and now begged those nearby to repeat the Emperor's words. But how did one summarize something so shattering? A tailor tried. He said, "We must endure the unendurable." A shopkeeper added, voice trembling. He said, "The war is over." A mother holding her child said softly. He said, "We have surrendered." And with each retelling, the realization sank deeper into the collective soul of the nation. The war that had defined a generation, that had consumed everything from Manchuria to Okinawa, had stopped. The burning, the hunger, the air raids, the endless funerals, the fear of invasion, all of it seemed to dissolve into the humid summer air. But what came next? Occupation, accountability, reshaping the nation from the ruins. And the people knew, in the stunned hush that settled across the streets, they understood another truth. Japan's future would not be rebuilt with the ideals of its past. It would begin here, in the uncertain silence after the Emperor spoke. August 15th, 1945. Japan, beyond Tokyo, the Emperor's voice faded from radios in the capital. The shock spread outward like a tidal wave. To the north, to the south, across villages untouched by bombing and cities flattened to gray ash. The same unthinkable reality settled in. The war was over. In rural Aomori, farmers who had paused mid-work finally set down their tools. The fields were quiet except for a distant dog barking somewhere beyond the ridge. One farmer, Takeda Genji, leaned on his hoe and stared at the mountains. He had lived through the Siberian cold as a young soldier decades earlier, had returned to become a father, then a grandfather, believing his son and grandsons would inherit a strong empire. Now he whispered, "So this is the end of it." A younger farmer approached him. "Takeda-san, what do we do now?" Genji sighed. "We live. That is enough for today." He looked at the blue sky, a sky that had watched the rise of Japan's imperial ambitions and now its surrender, and felt something strange, almost foreign, begin to settle in his bones that pieced. In Nagoya, a city still scarred from firebombing. People gathered near rubble that used to be apartment blocks. A group of widows, women who had lost husbands at Guadalcanal, Midway, and Burma, held each other tightly. One whispered, "At least no more women will join us." Another answered, "But what will become of us now?" A third looked at the ground. "We survive. That is all we can do." Nearby, a teenage boy who had trained with bamboo spears for a last-ditch defense stood motionless. He had prepared himself to die for the emperor. Now, he didn't know how to live in Okinawa. The reactions were even more complex. Just months earlier, the island had suffered the most brutal battle in its history. Survivors still sifted through ruins and caves looking for relatives. When the emperor's words reached them, many dropped to their knees, overwhelmed, not by surrender, but by the simple miracle of surviving long enough to witness it. That a woman holding an infant stared out toward the sea, remembering the cacophony of artillery and flamethrowers that had turned her island into a graveyard. Tears welled in her eyes. So many died, and now it ends with a voice. Her mother, older and hardened by years of war, placed a hand on her shoulder. "For once, child, a voice is enough." Far to the west, in the fishing village of Kagoshima, men hurried to the beach as the news spread. Boats came in early. Nets were left half-cast. The fishermen gathered under the shade of a collapsed storehouse. That a young man, barely 18, broke the silence. "My brother died in the Philippines. My cousin died at Iwo Jima. My father died in China." And now, his voice cracked. "For what?" An older fisherman put a steadying hand on his arm. "For a Japan that no longer exists," he said. "But we are still here, so we must build the new one." The young man looked down at his calloused hands, unsure whether to be grateful or resentful. Even in the snowy mountains of Hokkaido, where many believed the war was distant and the Americans would never reach, the surrender struck with unsettling force. In a remote logging camp, the workers crowded around a portable radio mounted on a crate. After the broadcast, one logger spat into the dirt. "So that's it? Just like that? All the slogans, all the banners, all the orders," he clenched his teeth. "Gone." Another man, older, wiser, shook his head. "Nothing's gone. The weight stays with us. But at least we can stop dying for it." A younger worker scratched his head. "What happens when the Americans come?" The old man's eyes narrowed. "We treat them as humans, not devils. Because the emperor told us to." In factories that had once churned out aircraft parts and munitions, machines whirred to a stop. Workers gathered around supervisors who had no answers. The strict rhythm of wartime production, the whistles, the commands, the quotas, evaporated in an instant. That a female riveter wiped sweat from her brow. "So are we dismissed, or do we keep working?" Her foreman shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. There is no manual for this." She looked across the quiet hangar, where the unfinished frames of fighters and bombers sat abandoned like skeletons of a war that would never resume. "This place," she whispered, "it feels like a grave now." From a northern forest to the southern islands, one feeling connected Japan more than any other: uncertainty. What would happen to the military? To the government? To the food supply? To their homes? Their schools? Their families? Their identity? People didn't speak these questions aloud. Not yet. But they lingered in every glance, every breath, every quiet street. Still, beneath all the confusion and fear, another emotion flickered. Hesitant, fragile, but unmistakable. Hope. For the first time in years, civilians heard birds instead of bombers. For the first time in years, children weren't told to prepare for death. For the first time in years, the future wasn't a battlefield. The emperor had spoken. Now the nation had to learn how to listen and how to live again. August 15th, 1945. Throughout Japan's military installations, from coastal batteries to mountain outposts, the emperor's voice struck with a force more devastating than artillery. For the civilians, surrender was a shock. For the soldiers, it was a fracture in the very foundation of their identity. In garrison outside Kanazawa, the imperial flag still fluttered proudly over the parade ground. Beneath it, Rows of soldiers stood frozen around a loudspeaker nailed to a wooden pole. Some had dirt smeared across their faces from defensive earthworks. Others bore fresh bandages from training accidents. All of them, from green 17-year-old recruits to grizzled veterans, listened as the final crackle of the Imperial broadcast faded into silence. Lieutenant Mori, a stern officer in his early 30s, stepped forward. His jaw shifted once, then stilled. He had survived battles in Burma, malaria, starvation, entire divisions collapsing around him. Yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. He swallowed hard. The Emperor has commanded us to lay down our arms. A murmur swept the ranks. Disbelief mixed with a dull, stunned dread. One private shook his head violently. Impossible. His Majesty would never. He said it himself. Another whispered, eyes unfocused. I heard it, with my own ears. Lieutenant Mori steadied his voice. There is no greater honor than obedience to the Emperor's will. Our duty has changed. The words tasted like a SH.I in a barracks in Osaka. Sergeant Watanabe held the broadcast in his mind like a burning coal. He had lost 2 brothers and countless comrades. He bore scars from the Philippines that never fully healed. He had trained teenagers with bamboo spears, preparing them for a final stand he expected to lead. And now, he sat heavily on his bunk, staring at the wall. Corporal Ishida approached. Sergeant, what do we do? Watanabe rubbed a hand across his stubbled jaw. For 15 years, they told us dying for the Emperor was our purpose. Now he says to live. His voice cracked, a softness showing beneath the old steel. I'm trying to understand how. Corporal Ishida sat beside him. Do we go home? The question, simple yet terrifying, hung in the air. Home, a place many soldiers feared no longer existed. Home, where families might already be gone, where ruins might stand in place of childhood memories. Finally, Watanabe nodded. If we have one to return to, yes. In a naval station in Sasebo, sailors gathered on the pier beside ships that would never see combat again. Torpedo crews, engineers, signalmen, all of them stared at the gray hulls that had once been symbols of imperial might. Petty Officer Sugimoto ran a hand along the cold steel of a destroyer's railing. We trained, we bled, we prepared for one last battle, he murmured. And now the war ends with words. Chief Engineer Murakami exhaled through his nose. Better words than fire, he said softly. Then, after a long pause, I'm glad none of us have to die tomorrow. Sugimoto swallowed. I suppose there is honor in surviving. But his tone suggested he wasn't yet sure that in the remote mountains of Shikoku, a platoon of exhausted soldiers listened around a portable field radio. The moment the broadcast ended, Sergeant Tanabe struck the ground with his shovel so hard the handle cracked. No, he shouted. We had orders to fight to the last. They said we would repel the Americans. They said a young soldier, barely 18, grabbed his arm. Sergeant, the Emperor spoke. It must be true. Tanabe froze. Tears pooled in his eyes. The first the men had ever seen from him. All those who died, he whispered, voice ragged. What do we tell them? The young soldier bowed his head. That we will live in the world they never reached. In Manchuria and Korea, territories Japan had once claimed with absolute certainty. The news triggered chaos. Many soldiers feared they would be executed by Soviet troops sweeping across the region. Others panicked at the thought of leaving behind families in Japanese enclaves. Some units refused to believe the broadcast entirely, dismissing it as propaganda or a trick. But the truth couldn't be denied for long. As more radios repeated the broadcast and officers confirmed the imperial orders, resistance crumbled. Despair swelled in its place. Captain Endo, commanding a scattered unit in Korea, stood before his men beneath a sky tinted with smoke from nearby battles. This is not a defeat of spirit, he told them, only a defeat of war. His soldiers didn't look convinced, but they listened because after years of unyielding duty, listening was all they had left. Across the military, one truth settled slowly. The Emperor had spoken. The war was finished. Their purpose, the purpose that had shaped their lives, their minds, their sacrifices, was gone. Some felt relief, some felt shame, some felt an emptiness no one had prepared them for. But as they folded their uniforms, cleaned their rifles for the last time, and prepared to walk away from everything they had been told to value, one question echoed through every barracks, every deck, every outpost. What does a soldier become when the war that defined him ends? None of them knew yet, but they were about to find out. August 15th, 1945, Tokyo. The cicadas scream in the heat as the clock nears noon, their shrill rhythm mixing with the distant rumble of trolley wheels and the uneven clatter of bicycles rolling over broken pavement. Inside a cramped wooden house in Kanda, 42-year-old Tanaka Haruo wipes sweat from his brow as he adjusts the small Type 94 radio set on the tatami floor. Its metal casing is dented from years of use, the tuning dial shaky from being repaired 3 times. But today it feels heavier than ever. Across the city, from bomb-shattered Ginza to the burned fields of Shitamachi, millions of Japanese civilians are doing the same thing. Sitting, squatting, kneeling in front of the single device the government has ordered them to listen to. Haruo swallows hard. His wife, Aiko, kneels beside him, her hands trembling over her daughter's shoulders. The little girl doesn't understand why the neighbors have gathered in their yard, why grown men are standing stiff-backed as if awaiting a verdict. But she senses the tension, the kind that presses on the ribs like a tightening band at a moment of static, at a few pops of interference. Then, a faint, unfamiliar voice begins to speak, not the clipped, forceful tone of military broadcasts, not the rehearsed slogans of the Information Bureau. No, this voice is soft, measured at high-pitched, and unmistakably imperial. For the first time in the 2,600-year history of the chrysanthemum throne, the Japanese people hear the voice of their emperor. Gasps ripple through the yard. Some kneel instinctively. Others freeze as if struck that Haruo's own breath catches in his throat. After pondering deeply the general trends of the world and the actual conditions obtaining in our empire, the emperor's formal court language is archaic, so complex that many can barely follow it. But even without understanding every word, they feel the meaning tighten around them like a slowly closing fist. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The phrase cracks across the yard like a rifle shot. Aiko's eyes widen. Haruo feels his stomach hollow. We have ordered the acceptance of the provisions of the joint declaration. We must endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. Aiko's hands fly to her mouth, Haruo's knees weaken, a neighbor collapses into a squat, whispering, "It's over. The war is over." Some begin to weep, quietly at first. Others tremble, unable to process what they've just heard. A few stare blankly at the radio, as if waiting for the emperor to take it all back, to assure them it's just another order to fight harder. But he doesn't. The broadcast ends. The silence that follows is suffocating, heavy enough to muffle even the cicadas. No one moves. No one breathes. Haruo finally exhales, a slow, shaking release that feels like it's been trapped for years. That it is done. Japan has surrendered. The war, their world, is over. He doesn't cheer, and no one does. Instead, he looks around at the worn faces of his neighbors. Men who have lost sons in Manchuria, women who have dug through rubble for water, children who have only known a sky filled with bombers, and realizes the truth settling across the city. They are witnessing the collapse of everything. They were taught to believe faith, duty, sacrifice, victory, all of it overturned by a single, trembling voice on the radio. Aiko leans against him, her body shaking. "Haruo, what happens now?" She whispers. He doesn't know how to answer, and no one does, because no one in Japan, not even the emperor, has ever lived through a moment like this. The air changes, the world shifts, and for the first time, the Japanese people understand, fully and painfully, the war has truly, irrevocably ended. August 15th, 1945, 12:10 p.m., Tokyo. The broadcast is over, but the silence it leaves behind feels louder than any air raid siren that ever screamed across the capital. It hangs thick over the city, seeping into broken homes, burned-out streets, and the hollowed shells of office blocks whose windows blew out months earlier. The cicadas resume their droning chorus, but even they seem muted, as if nature itself senses what has just occurred. In the yard behind the Tanaka home, no one speaks. Neighbors stand frozen, staring at the radio as though it might speak again and reveal some alternative reality. One where the empire still stands tall, one where their sacrifices still meant victory. But the wooden box remains silent, its tubes cooling with faint ticking sounds. Haruo rises slowly, joints stiff. His daughter, Emi, looks up at him with confused eyes. Oto-sen, did we lose? Haruo opens his mouth, but no words come out. Emi has never known a day without war. Her earliest memories are of blackouts, ration lines, mothers whispering updates from faraway fronts. She has only ever heard adults speak of honor, duty, and certain victory. Aiko kneels beside the child and pulls her close. "We will be safe now," she whispers, though even she doesn't fully believe it. Across the alley, an old man named Sato Genji, who lost his only son on Saipan, sinks to the dirt and bows his head. Not in prayer, but in exhaustion. For him, the emperor's voice does not merely signal defeat. It signals the end of the world his generation built its lives around. In another corner of the yard, Okabe, a former teacher dismissed for failing to show enough patriotism, wipes tears that surprise even himself. He had expected, perhaps even welcomed, this moment, and yet now that it has come, he feels its weight pressed down like a mountain. Someone finally breaks the silence. The young mother clutches her baby tighter and whispers, barely audible, "What will the Americans do to us?" It is the question echoing across Japan at this exact moment. From Hokkaido fishing villages to the ruined plains of Osaka, stories of American brutality have been drilled into the population for years. Civilians were taught that the enemy would kill them, enslave them, or worse. Entire communities have been prepared for total annihilation. Haruo feels the fear creep into his chest. He thinks of the leaflets dropped by American bombers, the ones warning of the coming destruction, the ones the government insisted were lies. He thinks of the rumors that women were being trained to fight invaders with bamboo spears. He thinks of the B-29 raids that turned night into a furnace. And he thinks of what surrender truly means. The neighbors disperse slowly, like ghosts drifting away from a shrine after a funeral. No one bows to each other. No one speaks of hope. Only resignation fills the air, the heavy, suffocating kind that comes after years of propaganda crack like glass. Haruo steps back into his home. The tatami creaks beneath him. The room smells faintly of dust and burnt wood, remnants of the firestorm that barely missed their neighborhood. On the low table lies a government-issued poster showing a smiling soldier holding a rifle. Glorious victory is certain. The ink feels like a cruel joke now. Aiko gathers the radio cord with shaking hands. "Everything they told us," she whispers, "was a lie." Haruo doesn't correct her, but he walks to the window and peers out at the street. People are wandering aimlessly, not celebrating, not mourning, simply existing in limbo. A shopkeeper closes his shutters. A train rumbles in the distance, still running despite the power shortages. A group of school children linger by a shrine gate, unsure whether to bow, run home, or cry. And above it all, the sky hangs in a washed-out summer haze. No bombers, no smoke, no explosions, just silence. For the first time in years, the silence is not a warning to it, is simply the sound of a nation stopping. Stopping to breathe, stopping to realize, stopping to face the unknown. Haruo places a hand on the window frame. The emperor has spoken. He murmurs, almost to himself, "There is no more war." But as he speaks the words, he understands the truth. Peace is not immediate. Peace is not simple. Peace is something they will have to learn, painfully, slowly, and together. The war has ended, but Japan's reckoning has only begun. August 15th, 1945, 1 p.m., Tokyo. The heat rises in shimmering waves off the scorched streets as the afternoon deepens, but no one seems to notice. The city feels suspended, as if time itself has stalled in the moments after the emperor's voice faded from the radios of 70 million people. The wind blows a scrap of newspaper across the road, its headline from days earlier still declaring decisive battle approaches. Now, the words seem like relics from another lifetime. Inside the Tanaka home, Haruo rests against the wall, staring at the floorboards. He does not move, barely breathes. The broadcast keeps replaying in his mind, the emperor's trembling formality hiding a message that shattered everything in its path. Aiko quietly sets a cup of barley tea beside him. Neither of them touches it. From outside comes the distant sound of muffled sobbing, a woman overwhelmed by the moment, or perhaps mourning a son who would never return from Burma, the Philippines, or the bottom of the sea. Haruo cannot tell. The whole city feels like it is grieving at once that he finally stands, unable to sit still any longer. "I need to go out," he says. Aiko nods but clutches his sleeve for an instant. A silent plea to be careful, as if the world outside has somehow changed shape in the last hour. Haruo steps into the street. Children wander aimlessly, their school bags dragging on dusty ground. A young man in a faded student uniform stares blankly at the sky, a pamphlet clutched in one white-knuckled hand, a wartime instruction sheet urging citizens to resist invasion to the last breath. He tears it slowly, the paper flaking like ash between his fingers. Along the avenue, merchants who once proudly displayed "For Victory" banners now remove them with shaking hands. One store owner rolls his banner so tightly that his knuckles turn white, then hides it beneath a stack of empty rice sacks. As though ashamed of having believed so fervently, a tram rattles past, packed with passengers. No one speaks. A few wipe tears. Others bite their lips hard enough to draw blood. The conductor stares straight ahead, motionless except for the mechanical pull of the fare handle. Haruo walks toward Kanda's shrine, its ancient stone steps cool in the shadow of the torii gate. A group of elderly men kneel before the offering chest, muttering prayers. Not for victory, not for the emperor, but for peace, a word they have not dared to utter aloud in years. One man, back bent like an old willow, lifts his head as Haruo approaches. The emperor sounded tired, he whispers, voice cracking. Haruo nods. He cannot bring himself to say more. A sudden commotion breaks the stillness. Down the street, a crowd has gathered around a soldier. His uniform is dusty, his helmet dented, and the patch on his sleeve marks him as a survivor of the Guandong Army's retreat from Manchuria. His left arm is bound with torn cloth, fresh blood staining the knot. He stands rigid, staring at the people around him as if they are strangers in his homeland. A woman steps forward, trembling. "Is it true?" she asks. "What His Majesty said?" The soldier squeezes his eyes shut. His voice comes out raw, scraped. "Yes, it's true." A collective shudder passes through the crowd. Someone asks, "Then what do we do now?" The soldier shakes his head slowly. "I don't know," he admits. "All I've known for 10 years is war." His helmet slips from his fingers and clatters onto the pavement. The sound rings out like a final gunshot. Haruo watches silently. He realizes with a sudden clarity that hurts that Japan is filled with millions of men like this. Soldiers who sacrificed youth, brothers, limbs, sanity, only to return home to a nation that has been told to endure the unendurable. But he turns away, unable to bear the sight. Farther down the street, he passes a small tea house where the owner has opened his windows for the first time since the spring raids. Inside, a radio plays government announcements in a cold monotone. Accurate information will be provided soon. Citizens are urged to remain calm. Avoid spreading rumors. But rumors spread anyway. Some say the Americans will arrive within days. Others claim the military is preparing to resist the occupation, that a few whisper that the emperor might abdicate, and others fear he might be executed. Haruo feels the weight of it all pressing on him. Fear, confusion, hope, shame. Emotions that swirl and clash inside him until he can no longer separate them. He returns home just as the sun begins to dip westward. Aiko is sitting on the wooden Engawa porch, her daughter asleep in her lap. She looks up as Haruo approaches. "What did you see?" she asks. Haruo sits beside her. He watches the shadows lengthen across their yard. People trying to understand, he finally says. People trying to breathe again. Aiko nods slowly. Do you regret it? She whispers. Obeying. Believing. Haruo looks down at his hands. Rough. Calloused. Marked by years of factory labor in the name of the war effort. No, he says quietly. But I regret not knowing the truth sooner. They sit together in silence as the sky turns the color of old paper, neither ready to speak of tomorrow, because tomorrow, for the first time in a generation, is completely unknown. But the Emperor has spoken. The guns are silent. The bombs have stopped falling, and in the uneasy quiet that settles over their home, Haruo feels the faint, fragile stirrings of something that once seemed impossible. Not certainty, not joy, not yet, but the beginning of peace. August 15th, 1945, 7:20 p.m., Tokyo. Dusk settles over the city like a weary sigh. The orange glow of sunset bleeds across shattered rooftops and the skeletal frames of burned-out buildings. Chimneys lean like broken fingers against the dimming sky. Smoke still rises from distant ruins where fires never fully died out after the spring air raids. But for the first time in years, there are no air raid sirens, no hurried footsteps scrambling for shelters, no distant thunder of B-29 engines. Only an unfamiliar quiet, a silence so deep it feels unnatural. Inside the Tanaka home, Haruo lights a small oil lamp. The wick flickers, casting long shadows against the shoji screens. The family sits closely together as the lamp's pale glow softens the edges of the room. Outside, neighborhood children gather in the alley, whispering instead of shouting. Their mothers watch them closely, unsure whether play is even appropriate on such a day. Emi tugs on Haruo's sleeve. Oto-san, will the soldiers still come at night? She means the air raids, the bombings, the firestorms. Haruo gently shakes his head. No more planes, he murmurs. No more bombs. He doesn't say the words lightly. He still half expects the night sky to suddenly roar to life. But the quiet holds. Across the city, lanterns flicker to life as families gather in small clusters. Not to celebrate, but simply to be together. Many homes have no fathers. Others no longer have sons. Some have nothing left at all. Yet tonight, they sit beneath the same motionless sky, trying to absorb what has happened, trying to imagine a future that isn't governed by fear, but a steady knock echoes at the door. Haruo rises and opens it to find Sato Genji, the elderly neighbor whose son died on Saipan. His shoulders sag, and his hands tremble as he clutches a folded military photograph. May I sit with you? Genji asks softly. Haruo nods and leads him into the house. The old man lowers himself onto the tatami with a sigh that seems to come from decades of buried grief. He places the photograph on the floor. A young soldier in a neat uniform, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed his empire invincible. Genji stares at it for a long moment. He died believing we would win, he whispers. Perhaps that is a kindness. Aiko bows her head respectfully. Haruo feels his throat tighten. Genji wipes his eyes with a sleeve. They say the Americans will arrive in a few days, he murmurs. I never thought I would live to see foreign soldiers walk through Tokyo. Haruo chooses his words carefully. We cannot know what tomorrow brings. But the Emperor asked us to endure. Genji nods weakly. Yes, endure. He forces a small smile. It seems that is all we have left. Later, after Genji leaves, Haruo steps outside. The street is bathed in moonlight, soft, cold, almost peaceful. Ash from long ago fires still gathers in the cracks of the pavement. 3 women pass by, carrying buckets to fetch water. One of them hums quietly, a lullaby that might once have soothed a child before blackout curtains became nightly rituals. The sound feels strange, out of place. Joy is too distant to reach for. But tenderness? Maybe there is room for that again. Near the shrine down the road, a group of young men kneel in silence. They've removed their armbands and unfastened their faded student uniforms. A few tearfully press their foreheads to the ground. Their entire generation was raised to believe that dying for the emperor was the highest honor. And today, the emperor told them to live. They are unsure how. Haruo watches them, feeling their confusion as if it were his own. How does a nation rebuild its soul after surrender? How does it teach its children to dream again? What replaces the prayers whispered into the bomb smoke? He doesn't know. But for tonight, he knows this. No bombs will fall. The No fires will sweep across the city. No mother will clutch her child in terror as the sky erupts. Tonight, Japan will sleep. Not soundly. Not peacefully. Not yet. But it will sleep. When Haruo returns inside, he finds Emi curled up beside Aiko, eyelids fluttering as she drifts into slumber. Something she hasn't done without fear in years. Aiko meets his eyes. "Is it truly over?" she whispers. Haruo kneels beside them. He listens to the silence outside, the silence that feels like a promise waiting to be written. "Yes," he says softly. "It's over." Aiko exhales, a long, trembling breath, and rests her head on his shoulder. Haruo blows out the lamp. The room dims into gentle shadow, lit only by moonlight pouring through the paper walls. For the first time since 1937, the Tanaka family sleeps under a sky free of war. And outside, Tokyo, wounded, hollowed, aching, sleeps with them. August 16th, 1945, early morning, Tokyo. The first light of dawn creeps across the horizon, pale and hesitant, like a world unsure of itself. It spills over the ruined neighborhoods of Tokyo, illuminating collapsed beams, fire-blackened stones, and quiet streets that seem frozen in the aftermath of an invisible storm. For once, the sunrise is not drowned by the distant hum of approaching aircraft. Haruo wakes before the others. The room is cool and still. The tatami smells faintly of dust and summer humidity. Aiko and Emi sleep beside him, without nightmares, without flinching at phantom explosions. Their faces, softened by sleep, seem almost unfamiliar in their peace. Haruo carefully rises, sliding open the shoji door with a whisper of wood against paper. Stepping outside, he feels dew chilling his bare feet. A faint breeze rustles through the cracked wooden eaves. In the alley, a lone cat prowls near a pile of broken roof tiles, sniffing cautiously as though the silence itself might be dangerous. Haruo inhales deeply. The air smells different today, not of ash or smoke, but of earth. Damp earth. Living earth that a strange, fragile hope stirs in him, but he immediately pushes it down. Too soon he steps toward the well to fetch water. Halfway there, he hears a low murmur coming from the main street. Not panic, not military order, but conversation. Actual conversation. The kind people once shared before war devoured every corner of their lives. Haruo follows the sound. A cluster of neighbors has gathered around a freshly posted government notice. An officer from the Home Ministry, young, gaunt, uniform hanging loose on his frame, pins up additional sheets while civilians read anxiously. Haruo approaches just in time to see the header, regulations for the period of transition. The officer steps back, clears his throat, and addresses the crowd. The government requests that all citizens remain calm, maintain public order, avoid acts of protest or disorder. The Allied forces will arrive soon. Cooperation is essential. A ripple of uneasy whispers moves through the gathering. An older woman steps forward. "Will there be fighting in the streets?" she asks. The officer lowers his gaze. "No. The military has been ordered to cease resistance. Complete surrender." The crowd absorbs the words in stunned silence. Behind Haruo, a man mutters, "Cease resistance," even here, as if repeating it might make it believable. Another voice breaks through, the deep, steady voice of the shrine caretaker, Ishida Masakatsu, a man whose family has tended the local shrine for generations. "What of His Majesty?" he asks quietly. "Will he remain?" The officer hesitates, then, in a hushed tone, "For now, yes." The uncertainty in those two words chills Haruo. For now, as though even the emperor's place in the world has become fragile. The crowd disperses slowly. Some walk with dazed steps. Others clutch the notice sheets, as if they might reveal a hidden message. A few weep openly, not out of fear, but from the enormity of the moment. Haruo turns back toward home, only to find Sato Genji waiting for him by the corner. "Haruo-san," the old man calls out, lifting a small wooden box. "A gift." Haruo blinks. "For me?" "For your daughter," Genji says gently. "For better days." He opens the box to reveal a small ceramic doll, cracked along one side, but delicately painted, a remnant from before the war. Its face still carries a serene smile. Haruo bows deeply, overwhelmed. "Genji-san, I can't accept." "You can," Genji interrupts, "because she deserves something beautiful." Haruo's throat tightens. He accepts the doll as though it were made of glass. As Genji shuffles away, Haruo watches the old man's bent silhouette diminish into the rising light, a symbol of a generation shattered but still capable of kindness. Back home, Emmy awakens to the sound of warblers singing in the distance, a sound she has rarely heard, drowned out as it was by sirens and bombers. She sits up, blinking, as Haruo hands her the doll. Her face lights up with wonder. "Where did it come from?" she asks. "A friend," Haruo says softly. "Someone who still believes in tomorrow." Emmy clutches the doll to her chest, beaming. Aiko watches them, tears brimming in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of something gentler. Hope, tentative, trembling hope. Later in the morning, the family walks to the market district. What they find is not order, but resilience. Merchants sweep debris from their storefronts. A fishmonger arranges what little catch he has on a wooden plank. A barber sharpens his razors in silence. A noodle vendor sets up a pot of broth and lights a small flame beneath it. They're not celebrating. They're not pretending. They're simply trying to live. Haruo feels something loosen in his chest. A tightness that has been there for years begins to ease, if only slightly. Beside him, Aiko whispers, "Maybe we will be all right." Haruo looks around, at the scarred buildings, the weary faces, the faint swirl of steam rising from a pot of broth, and for the first time since yesterday's broadcast, he allows himself to believe it. "Maybe we will," he answers. And, as the sun climbs higher, Tokyo exhales, a slow, cautious breath of a city stepping into a future still shrouded in uncertainty, but no longer in flames. August 16th, 1945, midday, Tokyo. The sun climbs high, burning through the haze that has hung over the capital for months. The streets shimmer with heat, carrying the scent of dust, charcoal, and the faint sweetness of late summer persimmons ripening on half-burned trees. Haruo takes Emmy to the small park at the end of their street, or what remains of it. The swings are twisted metal. The slide is nothing but a slanted sheet of rust. The sandbox is scattered with debris from collapsed houses nearby. But today, children gather here as if drawn by some instinct older than Ward. A group of boys sits in a circle, turning pebbles into imaginary soldiers. They place them in neat rows, mimicking the formations they saw in school textbooks. Another boy picks up a charred stick and begins drawing in the dirt, a crude sketch of an airplane. When he finishes, he steps back and stares at it, as if unsure whether to be proud or afraid. None of them run. None of them laugh. They play as though they're still waiting for the sound of sirens. Emmy stands at Haruo's side, clutching her ceramic doll. "May I join them?" she asks timidly. Haruo nods. "Go on." She walks to the group, kneels beside them, and places her doll gently on the ground. The boys stare at the clean paint, the delicate face untouched by soot. One of them reaches out to touch it, then pulls back his hand as though afraid he might break something holy. "What's her name?" the tallest boy asks. Emmy thinks for a moment. "Kiyomi," she says softly. "She's from before." The boys nod with solemn understanding, as if before is a foreign country they all vaguely remember but can no longer picture clearly. Haruo sits on a broken stone bench nearby. The seat is cracked from fire damage, but it holds. He watches Emmy interact with the other children, noticing how their movements are cautious, uncertain. That IT strikes him then. Most of these children don't know how to play without fear. Their games have been shaped by evacuation drills, military chants, and the constant presence of death. They know how to crouch in shelters. They know how to identify aircraft by silhouette. They know how to endure hunger. But laughter, shouting, joy, these things feel almost foreign. Aiko arrives a few minutes later carrying a small bundle of food, rice balls mixed with barley. She hands one to Haruo, who accepts it gratefully. Even with rationing and shortages, she has managed to prepare something simple, something human. They sit together, watching the children. Aiko's voice is barely above a whisper. I don't think they know the war is over. Haruo exhales slowly. They know the words, but not the meaning. A burst of wind sweeps through the park, sending dust spiraling into the air. The children shield their faces automatically, their reflexes born from years of smoke, ash, and debris. Aiko notices this too. How long? Until they stop reacting like that. Years, Haruo admits quietly. Maybe more. They fall silent. Suddenly, a distant clatter echoes from the northern end of the street. The children freeze. Aiko grabs Haruo's arm. That a lone truck rumbles into view, its engine sputtering. The emblem on the side marks it as a military vehicle. Imperial Japanese Army. For a heartbeat, everyone stands still, breath caught in their throats. The truck slows to a crawl. It stops as a young soldier climbs out, barely older than 20, uniform in disarray, cap tucked under his arm. His hair is longer than regulation. His eyes are hollowed. He carries no rifle. Behind him, the back of the truck is loaded with wooden crates. He calls out in a strained voice, "We're returning equipment to the community." Orders from headquarters. The adults exchange glances. This is new, strange, unthinkable. One man steps forward. What kind of equipment? The soldier opens a crate and lifts out a stack of school supplies. Not weapons, not ammunition, crayons, chalk, tattered textbooks, simple notebooks with covers faded from time and moisture. For the children, the soldier says quietly, "They told us to help rebuild." A woman covers her mouth with both hands, tears rolling down her cheeks. The soldier places the crate gently on the ground. He leans against the truck, exhausted beyond words. Haruo realizes he must have been driving since dawn, distributing supplies to any surviving school or community center he could find. Emmy approaches him cautiously, holding her doll. The soldier kneels to meet her eyes. His voice softens. "Your generation must learn something better than war." Emmy nods, a small, solemn motion. Then something remarkable happens. One of the boys picks up a piece of chalk from the crate and begins drawing on the pavement. Not soldiers, not planes, not bombs. He draws a flower. Another child draws a sun. Another draws a river. Emmy kneels and draws tiny cherry blossoms around her doll. The soldier watches, eyes glistening. Aiko clutches Haruo's hand tightly. This is the first time I've seen them draw anything beautiful. Haruo nods, throat tight. "Maybe this is how it begins," he says softly. Not with speeches, not with treaties, but with children remembering how to imagine something other than war. Above them, the sky widens into blue. Not yet bright, not yet clear, but open. Open in a way it hasn't been in years. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo, the Gyokuon Hoso has ended. For the first time in Japan's history, the voice of the emperor, distant, muffled, formal, unlike anything the public imagined, has spoken directly to his people. And when his final words fade, when the broadcast cuts to static, when the hum of the radio stops vibrating through the crowded streets and shattered rooms, a sudden, crushing silence falls over the nation. A silence so complete it feels like the entire archipelago is holding its breath in a cramped apartment in Asakusa. Private First Class Miyake Hirohito lowers his head until his forehead touches the tatami. His uniform hangs off him like a rag. He's been on medical leave since July, recovering from shrapnel wounds, but he still wears it out of habit. Now, for the first time, the fabric feels like a costume from a war that already belongs to another lifetime. His mother kneels beside him. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. From the open window, Hirohito hears soft crying drifting from the next apartment. A child asking her father what the emperor meant by supporting the reconstruction. A young woman whispering prayers. A man choking as he tries to explain to his own mother that yes, the war is over and yes, Japan has surrendered. Hirohito lifts his face and tries to picture his friends in the 27th Army. He doesn't know who survived. He doesn't know who is still fighting in Manchuria, completely unaware of the broadcast. He doesn't know whether the telegrams will ever come. But for the first time, he knows something with absolute certainty. He will not die in this war. Across the city, in the burned-out heart of Shitamachi, a shopkeeper named Suzuki Kiyomi stands barefoot in the street, still holding the ladle she was using to pour barley tea. People around her stare blankly at the loudspeaker atop the police box. Some have dropped to their knees. Others are looking around as if expecting someone to tell them it's a misunderstanding, that they heard it wrong, that the emperor would never speak such words. But Kiyomi heard it clearly. Endure the unendurable. The way His Majesty said it, soft, measured, yet strained, hits her harder than any air raid ever did. She thinks of her husband, gone somewhere in the Philippines. She hasn't received a letter in 8 months. She thinks of her son, drafted at 17, last seen boarding a train headed north. Endure the unendurable. Her hand shakes so badly, she nearly drops the ladle at the Yasukuni Shrine. A group of veterans stand frozen in their faded uniforms. They came here hoping to make sense of the rumors, hoping to hear from officers or priests who might interpret the situation. Instead, they heard the emperor himself surrender. One of them, Sergeant Okada Jean, grips the hilt of a wooden training sword. All he has left after shipping his real one to the front. His knuckles go white. He feels like he can't breathe. He fought in China. He saw Mukden, Nanjing, Shanghai. He believes, truly believes, that loyalty to the emperor transcends the body, transcends life and death. But now the very man he would have died for has told him to live, to lay down arms, to accept the impossible. Okada sinks to the shrine steps, staring at the gravel courtyard, as if waiting for instructions that will never come. And across the nation, from rice paddies in Niigata to fishing villages along Kyushu's coast, from evacuated schoolchildren in the mountains to survivors camped in the ruins of Osaka, a strange dual wave rolls over the people. Relief and grief point to emotions that could not be more opposite, yet now rise together like twin tides. Mothers weep because their sons might come home. Widows cry because the war has ended without giving them closure. Farmers bow their heads, whispering thanks that no more bombs will fall. Children stare up at their parents, finally asking aloud the questions they were never allowed to voice. Does this mean the soldiers will stop dying? Does this mean the planes won't come anymore? Does this mean we won? The adults don't know how to answer, because the truth is painfully clear. Japan has not won anything. It has survived. Barely. In Hiroshima, where the blackened ruins still reek of burned stone and flesh, a doctor named Nishimori Aya listens to the broadcast while treating a man whose wounds refuse to heal. She hears the emperor's voice drifting from a battery-powered radio, thin, ghost-like, speaking of a new, enduring peace. She closes her eyes. For days, she has treated burns so severe they seem to melt beneath her fingertips. She has turned away children to make space for elderly patients only, because she knows the children will not live long enough to benefit from her care. She has tried, and failed, to count the dead. But now, hearing the emperor's words, Aya finally allows herself to believe something she had not dared to think. There will be no second bomb. She presses a damp cloth to the patient's forehead and whispers, "It's over, it's over." She doesn't know whether she's speaking to Heimer, to herself, or to the thousands who died without ever hearing the emperor's voice. But amid all these private griefs and small, fragile hopes, one feeling binds the entire nation in that moment: uncertainty. What does surrender mean? What will happen to the emperor? Will foreign soldiers occupy Tokyo? Will food become even scarcer? Will retribution come? No one knows. No one can know. What they do know, what every man, woman, and child understands now, is that the Japan they have lived in all their lives has ended. Not with a ceremony, not with a final battle, not even with a victory or a death. It ended with a voice that millions heard for the first time, and that millions will never forget. The war is truly over, and the silence that follows feels as heavy as the war itself. August 15th, 1945. Late afternoon. The sun hangs low over Tokyo, staining the smog and dust in shades of gold and ash. Hours have passed since the emperor's broadcast, yet people still stand in place, as if moving might break whatever fragile thread is holding their world together. The war is over. But no one knows what peace looks like. At the Ministry of Home Affairs, Director General Kishi Masao wipes sweat from his brow as he sorts through incoming reports. Some describe crowds quietly dispersing after the broadcast. Others mention pockets of confusion or disbelief. One describes a group of students who bowed toward the imperial palace and remained kneeling for nearly an hour. Then there are the darker reports: a colonel found dead in his office, having taken his own life immediately after the broadcast, a police captain attempting to calm a group of civilians, demanding to know if the emperor had truly spoken those words, a rural town where residents insist the broadcast was a trick. Foreign propaganda. Kishi closes his eyes. He knew this moment would tear the nation in two. He just didn't know how quickly the fractures would appear. That a young clerk hurries in and bows deeply. "Sir, the phone lines to Osaka and Nagoya keep failing. Too many people calling for confirmation." "Keep trying," Kishi says, "and issue a directive. All officials are to explain the broadcast exactly as it was spoken. No editions, no embellisments." The clerk bows again and rushes out. Kishi leans back, staring at the ceiling. So this is what defeat feels like, he thinks. A drowning in paperwork, rumors, and grief, rather than bullets. A war fought now through words, through careful explanations, through preventing panic while holding back his own confusion. Because even he is unsure of what tomorrow will bring in a narrow Kyoto alleyway. University student Hamada Sora rushes home, weaving through clusters of stunned pedestrians. Her sandals slap against the stones. Her breath comes in sharp bursts. She is terrified, not of bombs. Those have been absent for days now. Not of soldiers, she has seen them retreat for weeks. Not even of death, she has lived too close to it for too long to know. What frightens her is the sudden collapse of certainty. Her father always told her that the emperor was divine, unapproachable, a distant sun whose radiance guided the entire nation. But today, that sun spoke with the tone of a man carrying unbearable weight. And in that tone, she heard something she had never expected: humanity, weariness, regret. She turns into her street and sees her younger brother crouched by the doorway, his school uniform rumpled, his hands covering his ears. "What's wrong?" she asks softly. He looks up, tears streaking his face. "Sora, what do we do now? If the war is over, what do we become?" She kneels, pulling him in her arms. "I don't know," she whispers. "But we'll find out together." Far south, in Kagoshima, fisherman Tanabe Hironori pushes his empty boat ashore. He's been trying to catch enough mackerel to feed his family, but the waters have grown thin, overfished, polluted, exhausted by years of war. As he ties the rope to a wooden stake, he notices the gathering at the shoreline. A dozen villagers, all staring at a small portable radio perched on a crate. Most haven't moved since the broadcast. A few have collapsed onto the sand, overcome by exhaustion or relief. Tanabe joins them, brushing salt from his arms. An old man mutters, "The emperor said we must pave the way for a grand peace." "What does that mean?" A mother replies, "It means the soldiers will come home. And if they don't," someone else asks, and one answers that a boy breaks the tension. "Will the Americans invade us?" His mother hushes him, but Tanabe answers quietly, "They're already on their way." He says it not with fear, but with a strange acceptance. He lost 3 brothers in the Pacific. He has nothing left to defend except his wife, his daughter, and whatever small piece of the future still survives. Maybe peace, even an uncertain, foreign-imposed peace, is better than the endless waiting. Meanwhile, inside the imperial palace, Chamberlain Tokugawa Yoshihiro escorts staff members through the corridors, ensuring none of the subversive officers who attempted a coup the night before are still hiding somewhere in the shadows. Just past the courtyard, Tokugawa stops that he sees Emperor Hirohito standing alone beside a window, looking out over the palace moat. The emperor's shoulders are slumped, his posture heavy with the gravity of a man who has just spoken words his ancestors never imagined would be uttered. Tokugawa bows deeply. "Your Majesty," he says softly, "the nation has heard your message." Hirohito does not turn. How did they respond? Tokugawa hesitates. "Many wept, sire. Many knelt. Some do not yet understand." A long silence fills the room. Finally, Hirohito speaks. "Neither do I." It is a rare admission, perhaps the rarest an emperor has ever spoken aloud. Tokugawa lifts his head slightly. He sees the faint reflection of Hirohito's face in the window's glass. Exhausted, aged beyond his years, yet calm in a way that unsettles him. "Peace will come," Hirohito says quietly. "But not quickly and not without sorrow." "Your people will endure," Tokugawa replies. "Endure," Hirohito echoes. "Yes, that is what I asked of them." He closes his eyes. "For the first time, I have spoken to them not as a symbol looking down from heaven, but as a man standing among them. Outside the palace gates, thousands gather. Some kneel on the ground. Some stand stiffly, unsure whether it is proper to look directly at the seat of their divine ruler. Others simply stare in silence, absorbing the enormity of the day. There is no cheering, and chanting, and flags waving. Only quiet murmurs, prayers, and the soft rustle of clothing as people shift their weight. A middle-aged seamstress whispers, "So this is what the end of the world feels like." A nearby soldier corrects her gently. "No, this is what the beginning of a new one feels like." But even he doesn't fully believe his own words, because despite the cessation of war, despite the emperor's plea for peace, despite the absence of gunfire and the fading echo of bombs, Japan stands now at the edge of something even more frightening than defeat, the unknown. And as the sun sets over the imperial palace, casting long shadows across the moat, the nation finally begins to move, slowly, quietly, into a future no one had prepared for. The war has ended, but the aftermath has only just begun.